Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Elaborate Topics. I am your host, Lona Small, and for those who are listening for the first time, I'm one of the co-hosts for the show with Tawana Wilson and Stephanie Whitehead, and Elaborate Topics is a weekly podcast that brings to you information for leaders in the lab and for people who work in the lab to be successful both inside the lab and outside the lab. And today I'm really excited because I have two guests with me. And we have Heidi Hanes and Peggy Coulter, and they both are co-workers of mine in a different way because they're laboratorians, and we've worked together with Heidi. I've worked with her many moons ago at a different hospital. And Peggy, we have done some work together when it comes to inspection. And what I'm excited about today is that they're going to bring to you something so different that I really wanted to introduce this, because this is how the lab actually contribute to the bigger picture, not just only inside the lab, but outside the lab. And so they're going to talk to you about some of the things that they're doing with safety internationally. And so Heidi and Peggy work for this company called pSMILE. And they're going to tell you a little bit about pSMILE. But they both work as senior QA and QC coordinator and technical specialists at this company. And they've had many years of experience in the lab as a technologist, and they've moved out of the lab. And yes, they're still doing work related to the lab, but they're doing something really exciting, and I'm going to allow them to share that with you. And they have a whole wealth of experience that I'm not going to go into a lot of details, because I also want them to have the chance to talk to you about, their journey. So Peggy and Heidi, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. So I want you to tell, I'm going to start with Heidi to kind of tell the listeners a little bit about your journey from being in the lab and how you actually got to be a senior international QA and QC coordinator.
Okay, thank you. Even going through school, I always loved science, and originally I actually wanted to become a veterinarian, but back then there was very few programs that had it, and there was always a long waiting list. So my next thought was to be a physical therapist. Started out in that, switched to pre-med, and then eventually I did go on and get my medical technology degree. And the funniest thing later, when I looked at my senior yearbook, under what career you wanted to be, I actually had put down to be a medical technologist, which I didn't know that I did that. So I worked for about 2 years in Western Pennsylvania at the school I attended for medical technology. I took a year off to go live in New Zealand. And again, while in New Zealand, I found a funny thing. When we were training for medical technology to get rid of us, they would give us to do hundreds and hundreds of manual reds, whites, and platelet counts. And we always, where in the heck are we ever going to use this? But in that little laboratory in the hospital where I lived in New Zealand, that's how they did their CBCs. They did manual reds, whites, and platelet counts. So it did come back to me. But I really give credit to my mom that I am who I am today, because she always emphasized to go as far as I could and never to depend on anyone else. She's 98 years old and still living on her own, and I really hope to be at least half the person that she is today. But once I got back in the United States, I actually moved down here to Baltimore, started out in Hopkins Blood Bank, worked there for 2 years, then decided I liked hematology better, then worked at Mercy Medical Center for 20 years in the hematology department. After 20 years there, I thought, well, I needed another change. So lo and behold, I came back to Hopkins, this time working in the hematology oncology department. And I have to credit Peggy for getting me into pSMILE. We rode the same shuttle in the evening to the off-site parking, and I would listen to Peggy talking about her job and all the trips that she was going on. And eventually I got the nerve to ask her about any open positions. There was one, so that's why I did join pSMILE. It's Peggy's fault.
Oh, my goodness. Wow, what a journey. And, although you've been so many places, you were able to spend a good amount of time at different places. And I remember you at Mercy. I worked part-time, and you were the hematology expert. Any kind of dip, any challenges that we need, we will have to call Heidi, and Heidi would be able to identify the most challenging abnormal cells. So thank you for contributing to my growth. Although it was so many years ago, it made a difference. So thanks so much, Heidi.
You're welcome.
So Peggy, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay. Hi, Lona. So when I started working in the laboratory, way back, I'm not telling you what year, I used to transfer to different areas every couple years. I would get bored, and I'd go to a different area, starting in hematology, then chemistry, then, moving around, until I had experience in several departments. So from there, I left the hospital to set up a lab for a physician group. There I got to experience lab management, from how to evaluate equipment, writing SOPs, obtaining biohazardous waste services, hiring staff, and even passing the Maryland State Laboratory inspections. After several years there, I went back to the hospital, to a different hospital lab as a generalist, and I rotated through different shifts. It was great experience seeing how different shifts handled all the work, until I finally settled down into my favorite area of microbiology. So I was hired from that hospital by the Johns Hopkins Hospital Microbiology Lab, first as a bench tech, and then when an opening came up, I moved up to the QA/QC training specialist. And this is when I got the request about the opportunity to train outside the U.S. There was a need for a technologist to travel to Haiti and help a laboratory with some on-site training. I had to get a passport. I knew nothing about Haiti, but I felt I couldn't miss out on the opportunity. They couldn't get anyone else to go because of travel restrictions. No one from NIH, their auditing contract, or other Hopkins staff. I traveled by myself. I was met at the airport by someone holding up a handmade sign with a name that looked similar to mine. But as soon as I was delivered inside the laboratory building, there were gunshots in the slum outside the clinic. So the laboratory manager used to drive me to and from the hotel each day, making sure to leave before dark just to keep me safe. However, they told me no Americans were being kidnapped, just local residents, so I didn't have to worry. However, after I got back home, I read about Americans who had been kidnapped the week after I left. But it was such a memorable and such a rewarding experience working with these technologists who were just so desperate for some help that when I returned, I applied for the open position with the new pSMILE contract, and that was in 2005.
Wow. So I suppose that desire to help was much stronger than, the possible risk that was outside.
Even though it's anything that gives you a story, you always have stories to share.
And hopefully we can get some stories in this podcast. You could share a little more, because I know you have a lot of stories traveling all over. So people may be wondering, what are they talking about? Traveling to Haiti, internationally, what's this? So Heidi, tell us a little bit about pSMILE. What is pSMILE, and what service pSMILE provide? Why is it important?
As you said in the beginning, pSMILE stands for Patient Safety Monitoring in International Laboratories. So it's an NIH grant that Hopkins got back in 2004, Peggy?
Yes.
And we have 4 primary functions for this project. The first function is protect patient safety and data integrity by monitoring, evaluating, and ensuring the compliance of the international laboratories with good clinical laboratory practice. The second function is a continuing assessment, evaluation, and monitoring the ability of these international labs to perform what we call protocol specific tests. These are the tests that they need for the safety testing, and it includes evaluating the instruments, methodologies, the primary and backup plans, and tracking and reporting ongoing laboratory performances using proficiency testing. The third one is to provide training, resources, and guidance to the laboratories based on science-specific needs and performance. And our fourth function is to manage and enhance our authoritative electronic data system to support the ongoing information and quality assurance for these multi-site global clinical trials. So those are the 4 function areas that we deal in for pSMILE.
Wow. So basically you're doing all of that for different labs that are involved in clinical trials. That's NIH's funding?
Yes.
So you're monitoring, you're doing training, you're making sure that they're actually doing, all these labs are functioning at the level that they should, and you have proficiency testing for them, and you have like an electronic database with different resources that they could use.
Yes, we do.
So when I'm listening to that, I'm seeing where labs could be having a lot of secondary benefits. So NIH is making sure that the labs are performing at a certain standard for. So how does the patient safety aspect comes in?
Do you want to answer that, Peggy?
Sure. So to put it in a little simpler format, when NIH sponsors these drug trials or prevention trials, virus trials, they go to these developing countries and they look for the patients who can participate. However, what we want to make sure is that anything that's done with our patients, that it's safe, that the laboratories can identify any side effects. Okay, so if a drug possibly could cause liver damage, we need to make sure that the laboratory can monitor the patients for their liver enzymes, that they can, so that we can protect our patients. It's for our patient safety. So in other words, cause no harm.
Right. It is, it's so impressive that we can function based on the training that we get as technologists. We could utilize those training in so many areas that we're actually helping to monitor patients who are on different clinical trials for patient safety. And while we're doing that, when I said there could be secondary benefits, these labs, we're building these labs up to operate at a certain level which is way above either at standard or above standard that they probably were used to operating on. So that is great that we can contribute at this level. So Peggy, who does pSMILE serve in general?
Okay, so pSMILE serves first our sponsor, the NIH DAIDS. Secondly, we serve the network groups who run the HIV studies, who are sponsored by NIH. In other words, these are specific groups who hold a study, and they're going to take it to the developing countries. So we are serving them, providing them with information on the laboratories and their quality. We also serve the laboratories and the clinics located in the developing countries. We serve the patients of those clinics who are getting, like I said, we're serving them by ensuring that the laboratories can perform the safety testing. And we're serving the laboratorians themselves. We're providing them guidance. We're providing them training. And that seems to be one of our biggest roles, is that we're empowering the laboratorians. We're providing them that. And at one time, we monitor at approximately 170 to 180 labs. So these come and go depending on the studies. But we're monitoring at one time approximately 170 to 180 labs internationally.
Wow. So some of the countries would include, could you tell us some of the countries?
Sure. So it includes India. It includes Thailand, the Philippines. We include, like I said, Haiti, Brazil, Argentina, Peru. We've in a lot of countries in Africa. We have Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, South Africa. So we're pretty, it's kind of, most of it's below the equator. But yes.
Lots of experience and travel and exposure. For people who love to travel, that must be really fulfilling, with different cultures, interacting with different people, seeing things done different ways in different labs. That's a lot of experience.
It's very exciting. I personally have been to almost 60 different TB laboratories worldwide.
Wow, that's awesome. So, Heidi, how did your experience, and I know you talk about your journey and some of the things that you did before you went to pSMILE, how did that experience as a clinical lab scientist prepare you for this position?
Similar to Peggy, I started out as a generalist, so I was able to get experience in all the different sections. That gave me a good base. Then once I was at Mercy and was in the hematology department, I oversaw all aspects of that area. It included the training, testing, creations and reviews of the SOPs, QC, QA. I participated in CAP inspections, both as an inspector and the one getting inspected, and I also was the key operator for the LIS system at the lab. So this gave me a really, really solid background in all aspects, and this actually is what I do now at my present job. All these different things, that gave me that really good background to be able to perform this job.
Wow, awesome. So for our listeners, people who are listening, if you're lab techs, it's really important and beneficial to get exposure to just different things, not just doing your routine stuff on the bench. Sometimes if there are opportunities for projects, to write procedure, to get involved in LIS, you never know when all of those skills are going to be beneficial, what's your next move. So it's really important to get that broad exposure. And if you have opportunities for cross-training, to cross-train, if you have opportunity to be in charge, do that. So, just listening to Heidi and Peggy, that was really helpful for them. And I know, Peggy, you seem as if you were probably one of the first in pSMILE. So what you think allowed you, or what was beneficial that allowed you to land that coveted position at pSMILE when you did?
When I did, just the fact that I was willing to go to a laboratory that no one else would go. I think they liked that part about me, that I did not have that fear.
Okay.
However, I just want to add what's beneficial is the fact that I never stopped learning about the lab. Not just science, not just the science of it, but the workings of the laboratory itself and keeping up with regulations. And learning that there's more than one way to do things, not just, it's not just one way to do it. By not immediately focusing in on one area of the lab, but working as a generalist until I found the area I really liked. And then I added the QA/QC in my role. So it's really, just don't focus on the kits and the instrument and the science, but learn about the lab.
Get a big picture view sometimes.
How it works, yes.
I think that is so important, Peggy. You hit it. You hit a very important point there. So I know, of course, COVID hit, and I don't know, for you, Peggy, Heidi, and your team at pSMILE, how was pSMILE at an advantage to operate during this time, or was that a problem? Were you affected in any way by the pandemic?
Really, work-wise, we weren't affected because we can do what we do anywhere as long as we have a good internet and we have a laptop or computer. So we continued working just like we did before. Now, the biggest problem was the effect on our laboratories because a lot of them were totally shut down. Some of them did not get their proficiency testing because flights weren't going in or out of the countries. There weren't agents coming in and out of the country. So really the pandemic didn't affect us working. It just changed the scope of our work, trying to get our laboratories to continue on with them. But for us, as long as we have a laptop and internet, we can work anywhere. That's one of the biggest advantage of our job. And to me, the disadvantage is I miss interacting with people. So that was the disadvantage.
Yeah. So, so based on what you're saying, I'm getting the feel that a lot of your work is done remotely. However, whenever you have to, there's part of it that involves traveling. So you travel when it comes to your monitoring and audits. Is that when you travel to visit the lab, physical monitoring?
Well, we travel when we find a need, whenever one of the laboratories has a need. Sometimes it's help in validation, sometimes it's help in, they do similar, it's not a CAP inspection, but they get an audit every year. Sometimes they need help in doing an audit. And sometimes we get new laboratories that we go to. But, of course, with COVID this year, we have been stopped for any travel since March, and we're not allowed to travel for a while. So that is, Peggy's very sad about that.
So maybe Peggy could do some reminiscing and talk about some of the challenges and joys of having your international clients and some of the experiences.
Oh, absolutely. So some of the challenges, of course, would be, number one is time zones. Our laboratories are located in places that could be on the same time zone, or they could be as far as 12 hours ahead of us. So sometimes we may send an email, and it may not get answered until the next day, and then we respond to that, and it's the next day. So, that's some of the hardest is the time zones. Another challenge is language barriers. Not all of our laboratorians are English speaking. So that can be a problem. sometimes explaining through email what we need when they may not read English. So it may take several emails because we're not understanding each other. So sometimes email communications can be difficult. We'll have a call. Sometimes we'll have a Zoom call or a teleconference, and not everyone has this problem, but I do. I have a hard time with accents on calls if I can't see their face and expressions. And I feel so bad if I don't understand. I don't want to be rude when I keep saying, "Can you repeat it? I don't understand you." So that can be a little difficult. Other challenges, like we may know how things work here in the U.S., but we have to understand some of may have local restrictions or regulations that trump ours. So that's definitely a challenge, but it's a learning experience too. Another challenge sometimes is they'll have different instrumentation or kits. I mean, they may have instruments and kits that are made from China, and we don't use them here in the U.S. because they have not been FDA approved. So we may have to learn, get package inserts and work through with these different kits and try and learn something we've never seen and compare them to an instrument we have here in the U.S. However, the joys are so much better. And Heidi will say it too. We get to know such a variety of people. I mean, we create bonds beyond the lab. And these are people that you're emailing on the side at the end of the day, and you're sharing some of your personal information with them, and just kind of working through things together. So you really get to know people through email that maybe you wouldn't learn. You wouldn't get to know them just sitting next to them on a bench. It's very, very interesting how email can bring this out. We learn etiquette of different countries. It's amazing. We can go. My first trip to Thailand, it was a learning thing because I speak loudly, but in Thailand they're very quiet. So I could hear my voice just booming, and I just had to learn, don't get excited. You have to tone down. They're not used to this. So that was an experience, but it was fun. The travel opportunities, going places, even though we may go to a country that others go to, the cities we go to may not be the travel meccas. You
didn't go to the tourist. You went to where people really lived.
Well, it's people who live, but it's also where HIV is prevalent. So that can put you in some pretty rough areas. So it's seeing something different of the world that you don't see when you're a tourist.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
But I'll tell you, the rewards of knowing how we're contributing to lab improvement and to patient safety is just, it's fantastic. When we leave, even though a lab may be with a study for a while and the study may end, we know that lab is continuing working with the things we've provided them, some of the instruction. We've had laboratories who've become CAP accredited with our help. And we've had other networks tell us that they'll go in a lab and they'll say, we're a SMILE lab, and that actually has some pull for them. So it's very cool.
Amazing. So, I thought so. Just listening to you at first, I'm like, you're actually creating sustainable changes in these labs. So even though your project may be for a while, you're leaving them better with higher standards. So that is amazing.
Right. We're not going in and doing the tests. We're going in and providing them the skills and on QC, QA, yes.
Wow. Amazing. Heidi, did you want to add anything, or Peggy covered everything?
I mean, I've on several trips with Peggy, and it's always been a pleasure to be on trips with
Yeah, great. So this is an open question. You both could answer it, or one of you. What part, if any, did mentorship play in your current career?
I could go first. I can say one time I went to an ASCP educational conference and took a 2-day course in hematology differentials. And the woman that did the educational conference, she was amazing. She showed me how you can take the hematology results and the differential, and you can actually do a diagnosis before even a doctor knew. So it gave me a whole different way, a new way of thinking about my job, how important my job actually was. And she actually was the reason why I then went on and did my specialty in hematology. So that was kind of a turning point for me.
Wow. It's so funny how, mentorship doesn't have to be forever. It could be as short as, that's a great example for, when you think of mentorship, you're thinking ongoing, but she took a few hours with you and she left that impact that changed the way you saw things. And, I wish that a lot of us would look at what we do. We look at the outcomes and not just what we're doing as a task. But
she made me look at it so that when I trained the students and everything, I made sure they understood it and they loved it. And many came into Mercy hating hematology, but at the end of their rotation, they wanted to work in hematology. So I wanted to instill the same a spark that woman gave me, and that just has gone along the whole time with me now, because I really love training people. I really love participating in their education and making that smart, get that little spark for them too.
Wow, amazing. Yes, I know, because I experienced it. I was one of those, although I wasn't a student, but I was a student of you, I was working there part-time, but yeah, you made it exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Peggy, do you want to add anything?
Oh, absolutely. My mentor came to me later in my career. She actually is one who was the project investigators on this contract, on the pSMILE original contract. And she traveled with me to one of the TB laboratories. She was a director of the microbiology lab years ago. However, on this trip, it was beyond what she knew in the laboratory, her mentoring. She would provide me with the greatest stories and lessons she learned from her travel experiences internationally. Because she, as a woman, would travel to developing countries, and it was learning. She had to learn to work with men in these male-dominated societies. So she would actually tell me how she would get them to go with what she wanted, but letting them think it was their idea. And she was fantastic. She was this little woman. She was older, little petite thing, and she was just a dynamite. She was so good. I just loved her. And another thing she provided me with is when you go to a laboratory as an expert, she said too many times we would see other people from other groups go there, and they'd be in their jeans and short sleeve shirts because it's in a tropical country. And she would say, still always go and travel and look professional. She said your word will mean so much more if you're a professional. So I especially remember that on one trip where every trip I always dress nicely. I make sure I have good slacks or a skirt. I often wear skirts when I travel. So I would wear long below the knee skirts. So one time I was in Africa and it was hot, but I insisted on wearing my long skirts and I wore them. And the first couple of days they were just kind of watching me, but midweek and towards the end, I could start seeing the women in the laboratory changing what they wore.
Oh, wow.
And they actually started dressing nicer. And it was just something I noticed, and it was kind of cool. I just felt like, maybe that made them feel a little better of what they were doing. So,
wow.
But yes, Dr. Schrosch she was very helpful for me.
That's amazing. That's a great story of a role model. And it's funny, last week I did, the last podcast I did was on self-care. And one part of it was body and dress, the way you dress, and aesthetic. So, so important how you present yourself in different settings. Instead of wearing slacks and jogging pants to work, you dress in a way that's professional, because that's how you're presenting yourself, and you're setting the example. You are a role model that other people could follow. Interesting.
And they take your word differently.
Yeah, and it's a way to understand the culture too, because I'm doing some work in Africa, and the person that I'm working with said to me that the kind of respect that they have for Americans is at a higher level. So they're looking to you to set that high standard, and even with training, they'll listen and they'll take your word. So it's so important to be to actually make sure they're safe with you. So whatever you're doing something to help, because they already look to you to set that bar, with that high bar. So it's interesting. Wow. So any advice you'd give to, say, a medical technologist looking for a more challenging experience, what would you say to them?
Okay.
You want to go, Peg?
Sure. I'll say it briefly. Develop strong laboratory bench skills, and that's good for both general and specialty. Develop that first, and then learn QC management.
Yes, never stop learning and reaching. That's the biggest thing. Don't become stagnant.
Go beyond the science.
Wow. So first of all, do the technical and get that, and then move beyond. So have a good foundation, and then start moving beyond. Then you move to QC and other things, but don't just stand there and stop learning.
Yes.
Correct.
Wow. Interesting. So I know you have done a lot in your life. You have so much experience, but I still want to ask both of you what's next for you.
So Heidi and I have actually talked about this. And
funny.
Yeah. Heidi, you want to talk? You want me to?
Well, we both were looking at this question, and I said, well, I want to continue on at SMILE until I retire, but then continue using my knowledge. And then Peggy came in and said, what did you say, Peggy?
I said, well, Heidi and I are both the same time in our careers. We're close to retirement age. Not there. We have a few more years, but we're close. But we've also talked about the opportunities for us to work as consultants. Because laboratories in developing countries do not have resources available locally.
Oh, my gosh.
So they can pull their resources. They can bring in consultants like us for specific training, someone to do observation visits, or anything to provide guidance on their improvement.
And neither of us knew the other one was thinking this until we talked about this.
You guys are making me excited because
it was kind of neat.
Up my street.
Yeah, it was just neat hearing that we were both on the same, thoughts there.
Yeah, you guys are right up my street.
I had a laugh when she said it. I started laughing, and I said, "Oh my goodness, that's exactly what I want to do."
So we all need to talk.
Yep.
Wow. So how would the listeners, they want to support you any of your ongoing efforts, or how would they learn more about you? Are you on any social media? Are you any way they could, reach out to you?
This is yours, Heidi.
Well, we actually have a website. It's pSMILE.org, O-R-G.
Okay.
So they can go on there and they can read about us. It gives the background. But the biggest thing on there, we have a section that's called resources, and we ask people to give us stuff, like if they have a wonderful SOP on something or even an article, just send it to us and we'll put it on our resources. And it's open to the public. So there's actually sections on there that we have gotten from laboratories. There's sections that we have created, PowerPoints. So anybody that has anything they think is worthwhile sharing with our laboratories or even with us, that's where we could get the support from them.
Wow, that sounds great. What I'll do, I'll put your website in our notes. So we have like a podcast note. So I'll put that information in case, somebody's listening to this, they're driving, so they could go back and get that.
Right.
So, wow.
So,
go ahead. Sorry.
So just to keep in mind that all the resources on our website, that helps to strengthen our laboratory support internationally. So this website is used not only it's used in the U.S. as well, but we're finding a lot of our labs go there first.
Wow. Amazing. I had such a great time talking to you two ladies. You have wealth of experience, and when we talk about mentorship, you guys could be great resources. Our listeners could probably reach out to you, hopefully, if they get onto the website to ask questions if they need to. But, I really enjoy the fact that we can use our skills at, so many levels. We can use our skills to help others, not only here in the U.S., but internationally. And I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today to talk to
Lona.
me and the audience.
It was
enjoyable.
Thank you so
Thanks. Much. Very enjoyable.
All right. So thank you, listening audience, for tuning in today to this show. Really had a great time. And if you want, just go ahead and subscribe to this Elaborate podcast through DirectImpactBroadcasting.com, or you can email us at elaboratetopics@DirectImpactBroadcasting.com. You can also contact me, Lona Small, directly at lonasmall@lonasmall.com. And I really enjoy talking to you guys. But don't forget, this is our weekly podcast, so you can listen to other episodes coming on Tuesdays. So you can listen at Direct Impact Broadcasting or on your favorite podcast platform. So until we talk again, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on DirectImpactBroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.